Thanks for coming, everybody, to yet another rendition of the Summer Sunday School. I did pass out some sheets. I printed 60, which looks like maybe a little less than what we needed. So if you didn't get one and you want one, there's two right here. Okay, grab one for the Bullocks. There's one there too, a couple there too. You don't need to necessarily use that document to follow along. It's sort of the meat of my presentation. And I printed it out for you because a lot of the statistics and stuff on there, I think, is just important for you to have to be able to wrap your mind around. The main argument in this book that I'm going to be talking about today, which is The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. It's written by a social and moral psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. If you find anything that I say today interesting at all, and you're thirsty for more of the same kind of thing, Jonathan Haidt has basically a blog. It's called a Substack, but it's called After Babel. So if you want to write down those two words, After Babel, you can go to that website and you can put your email address in, and you'll get sent a weekly email with more research and information about what they're further discovering about this issue as they continue to dive deep in. Let me pray for us, and then let's jump in. Living God, for this day we give you thanks for the beauty of your earth, for the wonderful peace and play that we find in summer. Pray that today we would come to an understanding of more of what it means to be human and more of what it means to be Christian in light of the world that we live in. Pray all of this in the name of your Son. Amen. Your child has just turned 10, and a visionary billionaire whom you've never met has chosen her to be a part of a permanent human settlement on Mars. Your daughter's academics and a scan of her genome, which you did not consent to, have secured her a spot on the colony. She said yes without you realizing it. She loves outer space, and plus, all her friends are doing it. You find out that they want children for this experiment because during puberty, children will become more tailored to Mars' environment, unlike adults. At least that's the theory. No one really knows the effects that Mars will have on your child, but it's all really exciting. There are other worries too. On Mars, your child would be more likely to experience radiation because it doesn't have the same protective shield that Earth does. Experts did a few tests on adults and found that there's a slightly elevated cancer risk, but no studies on children have been performed at all. Oh, and then there's gravity. Mars has some, but it's only 38% of what a child would experience on Earth. So children raised on Mars would be susceptible to childhood deformities. Did the planners of this adventure take this into account? As far as you can tell, they did not. It's just one big grand experiment. So, would you let your child go to Mars? No? What if it didn't matter because all your child had to do was check a box anyway? This is the opening analogy that Jonathan Haidt uses for social media and the anxious generation. And it's his argument that an entire generation of people, Gen Z, those born after 1995, have been sent to virtual Mars for especially the last decade. And we are just getting data back from Mars. It takes a time to compile data and to understand sociologically what's happening in human beings. And we're just now getting data from about 10 years of what life on Mars or life on social media is like. Welcome guys, pile on in. So I want to give you some data from Mars, some statistics. Now, statistics don't mean everything, but it's important for this discussion and for this, the argument that Jonathan Haidt makes, that we understand that what he's saying is that there's not just a correlation between the use of social media and devices and a phone-based childhood and mental illness. He's saying there is a causation between the use of social media and a phone-based childhood and an epidemic of mental illness that we are currently within, not an epidemic that was and ended in 2022, an epidemic that we are just now seeing the results of for the first time. 40% of children under 13 have Instagram accounts, even though the COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, was supposed to keep them from doing so. Get an older brother or sister, or you can just check a box that says, I'm over 13, and you jump on the shuttle to Mars. The percentage of US teens who have had major depressive episodes in the last year has gone up 161% in boys since 2010, 145% in girls since 2010. By the way, these increases, they go across all races and classes. So this epidemic is not an epidemic of the middle class or of the upper middle class. This is an epidemic of lower, middle, upper, and the 1%. We're seeing it all over the place. We're seeing it all across the what's called the Anglosphere and developed countries, and they're just starting to get data about undeveloped countries, and they're seeing similar effects, especially of children who grow up in undeveloped countries who have the same amount of phone use as others. College students since 2010, anxiety is up 134%, depression 106%, anorexia 100%. In 2023, a study of American college students found that 37% reported being anxious almost always or most of the time. 31% said they were anxious half the time. And let me parse that statistic for you a little bit. That means 1/3 of college students currently in college feel anxious about half of their waking moments, and everyone else, it's even worse than that. So if you can imagine feeling anxious half of the time, imagine what life would feel like, how crippling that would feel. So I hope one of the things that we accomplish in this, new knowledge should always produce empathy and compassion in the listener. So I hope some of these statistics do that. Self-harm, which means not the attempt to commit suicide and take one's life, but the attempt to hurt oneself in order to release some sense of pressure or anxiety or shame. The rate of self-harm for young adolescent girls, which Haidt classifies as ages 10 to 12, has tripled in the last decade. It's doubled for older girls, meaning ages 12 to 20. But for women over 24, it has gone down. It's gone down. So if you're 12 years old and you're 24 years old, right, just a 12-year difference, at some point you're going to be in the workforce at the same time. If you're 12, your chances of hurting yourself have tripled. And if you're 24, they've gone down. So when you see that statistic, what you have to ask is, well, what's happening to this 12-year-old that's not happening to this 24-year-old, right? Suicide rates in the last decade have increased 167% for young adolescent girls, ages 10 to 12. And I give you a couple statistics about them in particular because I don't have time to go into in depth into all of the pieces of this toxic puzzle. But the one piece I do want to say is that it's in some ways similar and different for boys and girls, the way that it's affected them. The decreases in mental health go across the board for both. The story of boys is a little bit different than girls. For boys, you have to include things like gaming and pornography, especially. Those rates for boys are through the roof. But the particular demographic that's been most affected in terms of mental illness is young girls. So social media is the worst, scientifically, for girls ages 10 to 12, 10 to 15. That's just what the data is showing. And I have 2 girls, so I hear that statistic and I take that very seriously. In 2012, 77% of teens had a phone, okay? But only 23% had a smartphone. So 1 in 4 kids in 2012 had a smartphone. Not that much. In 2016, the statistic flips. 79% own a smartphone now, and now 28% of children 8 to 12. 1/4 of kids 8 to 12 have a smartphone in just a period of 4 years. And finally, let me ask you, what would you guess the average amount of screen time is for a young, let's say a young adolescent girl ages 10 to 12 who has a smartphone? Any guesses?
8 hours.
Did someone say 8?
8.
Yeah, it's about right. So what 8 times 5 is 40. A full work week is 40 hours. So a full-time job's worth of attention and time and learning and growing is happening for a 10-year-old on this device that is going unsupervised by adults, unregulated by a government.
Say that again.
A full-time job worth of time, worth of attention and knowledge and growing and learning, 40 hours a week, is occurring for a 10-year-old on a device that is being unwatched by adults and unregulated or protected by the government.
That's the average 10-year-old.
That is the average 10 to 12-year-old child who has a smartphone. Yep. Sorry, we didn't come for jokes and laughter today, but before you can find a solution, you got to know what the problem is, right? So, okay, how did this happen? Let's give ourselves a little bit of a timeline. So, let's talk about the early 2000s first. Wait, did I lose y'all? Okay, we're just lagging. That's okay. Lag. Well, in the early 2000s, we did away with lag. Lag is what happens when the internet is moving slowly. Internet speeds increased exponentially, right? Does anybody remember this sound? Dial-up. Yeah, that was like the sound of me sitting on the one family computer that was like as big as an old TV and as heavy as one in my right in the center of our house when I was trying to play, I don't know, Jurassic Park or something like that. And I had to wait like 15 minutes, and I thought it was the coolest thing on earth, right? But internet speeds increased. Studies have shown that in regions where internet speed increases, mental health decreases. So that's without throwing smartphones into the equation, okay? So even just the increase of internet speed has shown for particular regions to decrease mental health. I remember this period because I was growing up in middle school and early high school, and we used to do this thing called system linking, which is where you would take an Xbox gaming console and you would pile like 25 high school boys who smell into a basement, and there'd be endless Domino's pizza and Hot Pockets and Code Red Mountain Dew. And you'd play video games and yell at each other, and there wouldn't be a girl in sight, right? Those were the early 2000s days. There was a lot of computing happening, but it was for information. The internet and its capability was really just starting to emerge. Anybody know who that is? Oh, it's coming. There we go.
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. So what about this photo is particularly significant?
That is the iPhone.
That's 2007. 2007 is when I graduated high school. It is when Steve Jobs unveiled the most powerful computing device ever known in the history of humankind. Steve Jobs is, he's kind of one of the high priests of our world these days. In 2007, the iPhone was invented. But for the first couple years, I remember one of my parents' dads had an iPhone, and it was like this rare object from somewhere else because you had to have a lot of money to have an iPhone. And it was a really good sort of Swiss Army knife. right? This is one of the images that Jonathan Haidt gives for, and I still feel this way about some smartphones. You can use Google Maps, you can have podcasts, you can FaceTime with people across the globe. It can do some pretty special things. And so the iPhone emerges. In 2009, something about the world of computing and media shifts. Does anybody know what those are?
First one for replies.
Yeah, so the share, the like, and the retweet buttons, okay? Twitter came out with these, and it seemed really harmless at the time. But what became introduced to the internet in 2009 is, I'll put the word up here, is a concept, virality. You see in that word, what word? Viral, right? You've heard this before. Things go viral, right? Well, when you can like or retweet or share something, the potential for that knowledge to be shared is exponential upon exponential upon exponential. So all of a sudden, you can tweet something because you're disgruntled about your boss at 9 a.m. and at 9:30, you can be fired, right? Because of virality. So all of a sudden now, a new dynamic gets introduced into the equation. And this is really important because some people will say, well, technological innovation has always produced chaos and repercussions in society, right? So if you invent a wheel, eventually you figure out a way to invent an automobile and an engine. And that's a great thing because people can get from A to B in a really short period of time. But it also introduces what? Car accidents. Yeah, that's right. So, but what's different about this particular technological innovation is that it can go viral, is that information can be passed in such a way that is based, by the way, on the main emotional triggers that human beings are psychologically built with, like anger and disgust. And the people who sit in the rooms and created these buttons have psychologists on their boards, and they know exactly how human beings are built. And that if you can retweet or unlike or share or unfollow somebody, it produces emotions and releases dopamine in your brain so that what you want is more, and it makes you angrier and angrier and angrier. So that's 2009. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, selfie. So iPhones were not introduced with a front-facing camera. That actually happened in 2010. So it took 3 years, but in 2010, the selfie was introduced. We became people of the selfie now, and you walk around and you just see people, right? Let me just take one real quick. No, I'm just kidding. 2012. Facebook acquires Instagram. This is a really important moment, and Jonathan Haidt tracks some of the data from 2012, almost like this was the moment, the nexus of it all, where from which everything came. Facebook acquires Instagram. Instagram had 10 million users in 2011, and it was mostly a social media app where people could share pictures and videos of things going on in their life, right? But then Zuckerberg and Facebook took a huge user base that Facebook had, and they introduced it to a new way of connecting on Instagram, so that in 2011, Instagram had 10 million users, and in 2 years, in 2013, they had 90 million users. And in the next few years, Instagram got really smart and started introducing these things like filters, right? So not only could you take 2010, you can take a selfie. 2012, if you were a Facebook user, you get introduced to Instagram. You hop on Instagram. 2013, you get filters. So now you don't just take a selfie. You can take a selfie and you can make yourself look real good, right? Make yourself look like a model if you want to. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, young girls, a 10-year-old, scrolling Instagram for 8 hours a day and 40 hours a week is seeing images of classmates and peers that look more perfect than any human being possibly could, right? And we've had this problem for a while in magazines, right? But in order to have this problem in the magazine, you have to go to the store and you have to buy the magazine. And well, I don't know, looking through an entire magazine of perfect looking women is about the same as what, 20 minutes of scrolling maybe? So just increase that by 100, 200, and that's what you get. Now, in the middle of all of this, right here, 2009 is where Gen Z hits puberty, okay? So I want to show you that because all of this stuff is happening in the tech world, and it's really only about a decade from fast internet to selfie filters, smartphones, Instagram. And I told you that in 2012, still only 1 in 4 kids who are in puberty had these devices, okay? But then 4 years later in 2016, so kids who were about 10, they're now about 16, and now 80% of them have these devices. Okay, so let me step back and make a few observations about this, and then I want to talk to you about the 4 main harms that Jonathan Haidt sees that social media, in particular viral social media. I mean, he would classify Zoom and FaceTiming. Technically, that is social media, right? It's using media to connect with other human beings. But he would say, no, FaceTime is good because you're looking at another human face and it's a way to connect to another person. That's fine. That's a pretty harmless form of social media. What's that? It's synchronized, yeah. Do you have anything to add, by the way? Not yet, okay. All right, let's make some observations. So Haidt would say that the internet and the spread of technology happen in 2 waves, okay? Wave 1 is this piece, introduction of iPhone and high-speed internet. Wave 2 is the piece that he would say caused the collapse, and that's this piece. That's once things start being viral, that's when kids start getting these devices and have them and take them everywhere. That's when screen time increases. These devices are designed to be unbelievably addictive, exciting, and unstable, okay? Haidt says they fuel the oxygen of adolescence, which is gaining acceptance from peers, right? I mean, that's what adolescence, and he would say adolescence is ages 10 to 20, but adolescence is garnering acceptance from your peers. So they fuel that. They give you a tool for that. But they also force adolescents to battle with the nightmare of adolescence, which is rejection from peers, shaming, bullying, and canceling. So it's not just that these devices are so fast and can make you connect and you can see funny videos. It's that the psyche and development of these young kids whose brains are extremely malleable have been given devices that give them more power in others' lives and have power over their lives than has ever happened in young people growing up in the history of the world, okay? Which means that the existence and daily life and relationships, and I'll use a bigger word here, consciousness, the way that we see and act and know and connect and believe and speak of someone born in 1994 is vastly different than someone born in 2000. Just a 6-year difference. So Gen Z have been sent to Mars, and they're the unfortunate test subjects for an entirely new way of growing up that's never been seen before in the history of humankind. And now we're seeing the results. So Haidt says, therefore, childhood has been rewired. Now, some people will say, as a counter argument, they'll say, well, okay, yeah, you don't like devices, I get it, but they're not that bad. And they would say, Josh, let's just look at the things that have happened in the world over the last 20 years, right? 9/11, Columbine, increase in school shootings, global warming, wars, more wars, and rumors of more wars. 2008, the markets crash. in 2016, a polarized election cycle, these kids are just anxious because the world's crazy. And the world's always been crazy, right? And that's true. But a really important researcher named Jean, I think it's Twenge. Is it Twenge? Yeah, Twenge. Argues in books that she's written about generations that what marks the difference between generations is not what's happening in history. It's actually the forms of technology that were introduced and that those generations used. So her argument is that the difference here, what marks the difference in Gen Z is that they are the ones who have grown up with these devices. And one thing I want to make clear that this presentation comes with casting no judgment on the young people of Gen Z, the people that I'm called to work with. It comes with no judgment on their parents because this is the world that they were given. So whenever I hear someone from an older generation say, those young people and their cell phones, I tell you what, they're just lazy and they're just on those screens all the time and I just can't believe it and the world's going to hell in a handbasket and what are we going to do? I just want to say this is the world that we gave them. And also, all of us generations love to judge each other, but has it ever been helpful? Has it ever been helpful? And for parents, by the way, I don't think there's ever been more of a technological difference between generations than Gen Xers raising Gen Z, right? It's like their kids got sent to Mars and they didn't know it, and they're doing their best. Okay, so that's half the pie. Half the pie, half of the argument is that young people have been underprotected online. Let me give a brief story about this. There's a 10-year-old in the book who describes having her smartphone for the first time, and she's on her smartphone, and her mom is in the next room compiling scholarships for her to apply for and doing the PSAT stuff and signing her up for the 18 sports, and is making sure she eats all of her vegetables so that she's a healthy human being who will live forever. And in the next room, this girl accidentally clicks on something and discovers hardcore pornography for the first time. So she's being extremely protected in the real world and entirely unprotected in the digital world. So the main harms that Jonathan Haidt argues are a part of this. First is social deprivation, right? It's causing young people to have less time together socially. In 2012, high schoolers were together face-to-face with friends 122 minutes a day. And in 2019, it was 67 minutes. So it was cut in half. This is an interesting piece because I think a lot of people still believe that COVID is the main issue, right? Well, it was COVID that caused all the problems in the schools, and it was COVID that's caused the problem for young people, and it's COVID that's making them anxious. COVID was not like the initial virus, it was like a symptom, okay? Kids were already socially distanced by the time COVID arrived. What COVID did is it just made it worse, right? It just put an exclamation point on a problem that was already arising. And Jonathan Haidt would have us think about what he calls opportunity cost. If you are on a device 8 hours a day, imagine what you could be doing with those 8 hours, right? Imagine what previous generations got to do with those 8 hours. Now, I'm not saying that all of those hours that young people are on are that they're doing bad things and that it's all bad. But overall, the research is showing that it's not been helpful. So there's an opportunity cost built in. Sleep deprivation. You probably know this because, I don't know, a lot of us are addicted to our phones just as much as young people are. But if you're sitting there and looking at your phone and then you try to fall asleep, science shows that your sleep's just going to be worse. It's going to be less. You're going to have more frequent wake-ups. I heard stories from young people during COVID and of staying up all night just on TikTok or whatever because they didn't have anything else to do and because you keep clicking and those dopamine hits keep coming. So they're losing sleep, chronically losing sleep. Someone in their adolescence is supposed to get on average 9 hours of sleep. And if you don't get 9 hours of sleep for a long enough period of time, or that sleep is not quality sleep, and your brain is at the peak of its development as a human being, what's going to happen is you're going to feel anxious and angry and depressed, right? Attention fragmentation. It's just a big way of saying we just don't pay attention as much as we used to anymore, right? I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when I get to the solutions, the 4 big solutions that Jonathan Haidt offers, one of which has to do with phone use in schools, and I'm extremely passionate about that one. But if you're in a classroom and you are getting notifications in your pocket, are you going to be able to pay attention? When you're at your work and you have your phone, or let's say this is maybe a more common example. If you're out to eat with somebody, what do people do? Put their phone right on the table, right? Which is a way of saying, you have half of my attention. But if this thing buzzes or notifies, I'm going to pick it up. And it's become just kind of, it's a social grace that we've lost, right? It's kind of commonplace. We don't even tell people they're being rude anymore when they take their cell phone and just start, what was that you were saying? What was that? What would that be? Right. Attention fragmentation. The last, addiction. Devices and social media, it's not just that they're addictive because, gosh, aren't they fun and you have access to all this stuff. They were created by very smart people to addict young brains. The tech companies who have done this, they know, by the way, they've sat in rooms and made decisions that because of the profit margins, they know that they are addicting 12-year-olds to TikTok. But they don't care. They don't care. And there are people who have come out of these companies with a conscience and have said, I was told to do things, I was a part of doing things that I knew was hurting the mental health of young people, and I did them anyway. There's this scene from a Netflix CEO who's sitting in a room with his board members, and they're talking about the quarterly financial reports, and he makes a comment that he's not competing with other streaming services, he's competing with sleep. That's his competition. If we could just get people binging as long as possible, then we're good to go. And it affects them, sure, but we make a lot of money. Okay. Those are our 4 main harms. Let's move on to the second piece of the pie. Safetyism. So first half of the argument is that kids are underprotected online, right? The second half of the argument is that kids are overprotected in the real world, okay? Show you a little image here. The helicopter parent, whatever. Safetyism comes from the word safety, obviously. It's a part of something that's called concept creep. Concept creep is when a term expands because of the way it's being used in the zeitgeist, in the cultural moment. So, for example, the word trauma has experienced a huge concept creep in the last 10 years. When I was growing up, the only context in which I ever heard the word trauma was what? What would you guess? War, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It was an acute, and there are other major examples of huge trauma, but I remember very distinctly hearing about PTSD for the first time in high school, right? A hugely traumatic event that causes alterations in the way one understands himself and the world, a moral and mental wound. And trauma now, for better for worse, I'm not going to make comments on it, but it's a word that we use for a lot of things, right? People can say it's traumatic to have a college professor tell them that something they see is incorrect, right? So that's concept creep. Well, safety has experienced concept creep. We have used this word 600% more in the last 30 years than it used to. Safety is everywhere. People think that the world is less safe now than it was in the 90s. Do you feel that way? I kind of do, but I'm wrong. It's actually not. The world is actually more safe than it was in the 90s. There's less crime. There's less abductions. One interesting little piece of the puzzle is that Gen Z are having less teen pregnancies than any generation before. They're having less premarital sex. They use less drugs, and they drink underage way less than anyone ever has. They're the most safe generation and the most anxious generation that's ever existed. Safety, safety, safety.
Does that mean anxiety is a good thing?
I mean, anxiety, right, anxiety was given to us as a tool to deal with, like, give the most extreme example, you're a zebra in the jungle and there's lions trying to get you, and anxiety says you better run the other way, right? But what happens when all of the lions disappear and you don't have a way of dealing with the anxiety is you're just anxious all the time, right? And a little bit of anxiety is probably okay, but the amount that they're experiencing is not just detrimental, you've heard the suicide rates, it's killing people. Playground equipment has become far more safe than it was even 10 to 20 years ago. When Jonathan Haidt said this, I thought about the playgrounds where we take Joanna. There's less merry-go-rounds. Did anybody know that? They're taking merry-go-rounds away because, I don't know, they're unsafe, I guess. But so now I find myself being like, what unsafe park can we go to? But it's true. If you look at, there are pictures in this book of playgrounds from like the 40s and 50s. There are kids, 10-year-old kids sitting on top of poles, hanging 40 feet in the air, who could plummet to their deaths. And nobody cares. Now that might be an overcorrection. We might not want to go that way, but it's like we've put straitjackets on all of our playground equipment. And maybe some of you remember when you were growing up, what the age was when you knew that you were allowed to sort of leave home and be away, and it was like be home for dinner, right? And even that age it's gotten much, much, much older. Now, I'm not going to go into why people perceive the world to be less safe, but I will say, doesn't it make sense that if you have a device that will tell you when all the terrible things that have just happened in the last 12 hours, and you wake up in the morning and it blips at you and lets you know about a shooting here and a tsunami there. And this is one thing we have to decide as global citizens. We want to be informed, but how much being informed is at what point is it unhelpful, right? Our brains were wired to only take the amount of pain and suffering of a small village, okay? So, but we're being asked to comprehend and try to figure out and fix the problems of 7 billion people because of these devices. So of course we feel like the world is scarier than it is. Anything from safetyism? Okay. Jonathan Haidt recommends this a book about parenting that he read, and his wife, and it gives, I haven't read it yet, Laura's just begun reading it, but it gives this concept of the gardener and the carpenter. And it says, part of what's the argument for safetyism is that parents thinking that the way to raise children is that they're like a piece of wood and you need to shape the wood exactly into the form it needs to be, right? So it's like every little jot and tittle, every little corner, you need to be there. You need to make sure that it's actualized and perfect and right. And behind this idea of safetyism is the job of a parent is to make sure that kids are introduced to the littlest amount of stress in every single situation, right? Now, we don't want capital S stress because that can become trauma, right? We want bruises, not scars, says Jonathan Haidt, right? Bruises are fine. This is what safety is doing. Gardener, he says, what if we think of raising kids like a gardener, and what we're doing is we're tilling the soil, but we're also letting them grow and become who they're supposed to grow and become. And we're there in the garden. The gardener has to work with the soil in order for a good crop to come forth. The gardener isn't elsewhere. What happens if the gardener's not around at all? Well, all the weeds pop up, the plants die, the sun kills, right? So we have to be actively involved, but maybe there is a way in which we can try and parent kids and not over-parent them. Maybe we can underprotect them a little bit more in the real world, and we can overprotect them a little bit more in the virtual world. Yeah.
One of the things Haidt talks about in one of his interviews is how safetyism can lead to a sense of purposelessness for teens. And he cites some data saying that teen boys now, I cannot remember, it's something like 60 or 80% of them answered a question on this survey, a national survey, saying, I feel like I don't really matter. I don't make a difference to anyone in my life. And that's in part because they don't, what's the expectation on them? I asked. The expectation is just continue being safe and stay on your phone, not that you have an important purpose to serve. So there's a element of this that's about purposelessness. is really important to consider too.
And yes, and as I said this, I don't know if it was in pulpit or where it was. Some of you are probably sick of me talking about this, but I'm going to keep doing it. That now, for the first time in the United States, the demographic who is most likely to take their life is men ages 20 to 25. It was prior to that men ages 55 to 60. So something is also happening where we're seeing on the other side, right? Once you emerge from an adolescence where all of this stuff is going on, there's a purposelessness happening, and it's causing people who have their whole lives in front of them, right? Like when you're 22, like, isn't that like such a fun time of life? And young men are taking their lives. Okay, so let's get to some solutions, because I've thrown a lot of data and stuff at you. These are the 4 big picture solutions that Jonathan Haidt offers. What I want to say is I think it's in equal parts, since it's a structural problem, and what I mean by that is like big picture problem that we're dealing with across our country. There needs to be big picture structural answers, but it also is a deeply personal problem where within families will have to figure out how they want to do this. But what I can say is if you try to be the only parent who tells your kid that they can't have a smartphone, what's going to happen? Their life's going to be terrible. They're going to have more anxiety because they're the kid without a smartphone, right? So that's not the answer. The answer is not just, I'm going to be the one parent who's going to really buck the trend. It's what Haidt calls a collective action problem, meaning this is a problem that we have to solve together. Well, what would happen if me and Laura got together with 10 other couples and said, hey, let's start talking about this. Hey, when our kids are entering into middle school, how are you handling phones? What are you doing? And you know what? There's a lot of interesting alternatives to just giving a kid a smartphone when they're 10. You can give them phones like the old school phones. There are watches where you can FaceTime and connect. You can use parental controls on Apple devices really creatively. They just don't really market it or talk about it too much. But there's a lot you can do. You just need to know about it. You just need to be educated about it. His first proposal is no smartphones before high school. So no smartphones whatsoever. So did I just lose the mic? Okay, it died, so I'll just talk loud. Can you still hear me? Okay. No smartphones before high school. Number 2, no social media before 16. Now, I know you hear that and you think that's absolutely bonkers. Jonathan Haidt is out of his mind. But 16 is the moment when there's enough development happening in the cerebellum and the higher thinking regions of the brain and adolescence where the amount of dopamine hits that you're getting because of being on these devices, you can sort of withstand it and contextualize it. When you're 10 and 11 and 12, your brain is just quite simply not in a place to be able to understand or to contextualize these things. And beyond that, we've done this as a country with a billion things before, right? There was a time when we thought seatbelts were silly. What did we do? Well, people were dying in car accidents, so we thought we might as well do seatbelts. There were cigarettes in vending machines, maybe in some of your high schools, right? You could probably smoke on campus. You could smoke in an airplane. What do? We said, well, maybe it's not good to have a pack of Marbs sitting there for Johnny to buy before he goes to PE. Maybe we should make a change. Why? Because, well, it causes lung cancer and a lot of other issues. The drinking age in our country used to be 18. What happened? Well, there were a lot of 18-year-olds who were driving drunk and killing people. So we said, you know what? There needs to be a minimum age because they're not at the point where their brains can deal with the responsibility of drinking alcohol, right? So why not say the same thing for something that is causing more havoc than all of those things put together? Minimum age for social media, 16. Third one, which I'm hugely passionate about, and is probably one, these first 2 are, the government could get involved in number 2. There are ways that tech companies could ensure that you cannot get on a device if you are 13. There are ways to verify age that they have not built in to their system. But number 3 is a place where, as a local community, I think we can make a huge difference, which is phone-free schools. Let's at least agree that you go home, it's up to the parents, right? It's up to the parents and it's up to that family to figure out what the best thing is, right? And maybe for this kid, social media at 15 is fine, whatever, okay? But when it comes to phones in schools, that is something we can control. And kids spend most of their time sleeping and in school. Two of the places where phones are absolutely everywhere and wreaking havoc. And the studies that have been put out about what has happened in schools who have moved from having phones in the classroom to not are pretty amazing. For test scores, even for things like bullying, for the mental health of their students, a complete transformation. It's like teachers will say, it's like we have a new school. Okay, now phone-free schools doesn't have to mean you can't bring a phone to school. It could mean that every kid is given a technology pouch that they have in their locker. And you know what? After class, if you must check your phone, you can go check your phone. But if you have your phone in your pocket in class and a notification goes off, then detention time, right? I am not aware, correct me if I'm wrong, is there any school in Rowan County that is phone-free? Is it? Kids can't have a device? That's great. Not out. Do they have to have it? Is it allowed in the classroom but just not on them, or does it have to be like in their locker elsewhere? Do you know?
Not certain.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well, Joanna's becoming Catholic in 6th grade. I just found it. Is it? You can't have phones? Do you think that's been overall like positive thing for being in the classroom when you were there? Do you notice a difference in high school and middle school? Yeah. Phone-free schools. This is something where we can write to our school board about this. This is something where we can talk to principals. That's why I want people to have access to this information, because for me, once you hear what's going on, it's like, well, this is something we can solve, right? We don't want our young people to be going through this. This is not the world that we want for them. These suicide rates are unacceptable. I refuse to believe that in 10 years, these rates will be the same, right? And they don't have to be. So what are we going to do about it? And last, under protecting kids a little bit more in the real world. This is the play-based childhood thing. You can see how the two things are connected though, right? So if kids have phones, if kids aren't having smartphones before high school and they're not on social media before 16 and they can't have their phones in schools, what's going to happen is that the way that they interact in the real world is going to be completely different. And I have seen this to be different. And I'm not going to ask Ebby or Nolt to describe what it's like to be in Mexico without a smartphone, but I've seen it. I have seen it. I remember the trip when I allowed kids to have their phone for 30 minutes at 10 o'clock only in their bunks. What happened is that they spent most of the time in their bunks, and I fought the phone battle the whole trip. So now I still fight the phone battle a little bit, but every single year in Mexico, kids tell me that they have never quite hung out in this way before, right? Because it's a different way to connect. If you just can't, right? It's a complete, like, what is it like to go to an airport these days? Has anyone made eye contact with you at an airport in the last 5 years? No, because everybody's just like, give me that dopamine, right? It's like the freest and drug in America, right? Okay, I'm about done. So let me just say a few other things, because we are a church. So I see this as I'll put it this strong. This is a moral obligation for us because of who Jesus is, to get involved with this problem and to pool our resources and our voices and our bodies, and to put things on the line and to sacrifice things for these kids. This is an image from one of Gen Z's favorite television shows, one of my favorite television shows, called Stranger Things. In Stranger Things, a group of kids growing up in Hawking, Indiana, discover that there's this upside down world underneath them where these monsters and poisonous beings are starting to slowly infect the real world and it's a story, a battle between these monsters and these kids. And while these kids are battling it, lives are lost and their lives are forever changed because of this upside down world that's finding its way and wreaking havoc upon the common world. And I think this story is I wonder sometimes if this story is such a central story to Gen Z because it's what's happening to them. One of the things that's interesting about this issue is if you talk to young people, most of them will say, yeah, I know this is happening, but I can't get off my phone because everyone else is on their phone. They are uniquely aware of, and in some cases are the ones who are telling adults, these are the changes we have to make. You guys don't understand what it's like, right? Paul in his letter to the Ephesian church talks about this big concept that maybe you've read before and thought, what in the world is Paul talking about? Called the powers and principalities, okay? The powers and principalities are suprahuman forces that have some kind of agency whose job it is to enslave humankind, to poison and twist and destroy humankind, to wipe the image of God off of humankind. You can see the powers and principalities in things like childhood sex trafficking, right? You can see it in things like racism. You can see it in this, I would argue, right? And what's key to understanding Paul's theological point is that the powers and principalities are things that come from good gifts of God that become twisted and mangled, right? So is technology in and of itself evil? No. It's helps us to do unbelievable things. Is social media in and of itself, does it have to be evil? Can it be a way for people to connect? Well, sure it can. What's happened? It's been poisoned. It's been twisted. And this may sound crazy. It may sound like an absolute quack, but I have to think theologically about this. And to me, there's something going on underneath the surface here beyond just human beings trying to make money. There's a power or principality that is causing an epidemic in young people whose lives are being shattered by this. So as Christians, this is also a fight, right? This is the powers and principalities at work in the world. In Paul's letter to the Philippian church, he tells us what our stance is supposed to be. You may remember this. It's called the Christ hymn. It says, for Christ did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited or taken advantage of, but he took the lowest form of a human being, a slave, and was obedient to death, even death on a cross. The point is, what Jesus does, what God does in Jesus Christ, is God becomes literally in his flesh a part of what the problem is. God takes on what the powers and principalities are doing to humankind in his very body. Paul says, he who knew no sin became sin. God takes the problem on into his very body, and Jesus carries it to the cross where it is crucified, and he rises from the dead with a different dream, with a new creation, with a different way of being human. But before Paul says this is what Christ has done, he doesn't let us off the hook. Does anybody remember what he says? Have in your minds the same attitude that was in Christ Jesus. So what is the attitude in the mind of a Christian supposed to be? The path that Jesus took from the heights of power and as God all the way to taking on the lowest possible problem in order to understand and understand it, but also to put it to death. So sympathy is not enough. It's not enough to say, I'm sorry. Empathy, walking in the shoes of somebody else, that is what's necessary. And that's what Paul says our position is supposed to be. I'm going to stop it there. What questions? Let's do just like a couple minutes. Does anybody have a question or comment? Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's all a part of this. I think that's like, if it's all one wave, and that's a part of the water of the wave. One philosopher says that within our modern world, which is like basically year 1600 to now, or in the modern period of history, that one of the trajectories of modernity is that everything must move faster all the time. And when you introduce devices into that, then you get the world feels faster and busier, right? Like, does the world not feel busier than it was before, faster than it was before to you? I mean, whenever I ask people, how you doing? People, most of the time it's tired. So I wonder if that's a part of the safetyism piece too, and sports are great, right? Sports are a great way for young people to connect and to be introduced to small amounts of stress and have to figure it out. I just attended my 12-year-old nephew's baseball tournament in Gatlinburg, and I got to watch him and his parents talk about what it felt like to lose in a devastating way and something he really cared about. And this is a lot of stress for a 12-year-old kid in a high-pressure game, and it was really good for him to learn that. So there's some goods there, but when that gets twisted, it becomes, if my kid doesn't jump into the wave and get into all of these schools and know what college they want to go to by age 12, and now sports you're in the major leagues by age 13, it's like we're all a part of it. This is the way things have gone. We can't change it, but it's hurting kids. It's hurting kids. So I think that's a part of it. And if you want to protect your kids in the real world, you can maybe put them in 3 too many sports or 17 too many AP classes, because you can control that. That's something that's controllable. The other thing is, if you are on a phone 8 hours a day, this is a part of that opportunity cost. It's going to feel so much more overwhelming to be in an AP class or to be in 3 sports, because 8 hours of your time a day are spent not doing that. So everything else is going to feel like it's sped up, like it's faster. There's a reason why influencers, a billionaire's created on YouTube almost every week now. So there's a reason why influencers are kind of now becoming the cultural pastors or priests. And they're the ones who seem to be able to effortlessly move through the fast busyness of life, but still look great, look tan, look awesome. My life's great. Here's this health product I'm advertising. So yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, Stephen.
I was looking at the 4 solutions, and you said there's not a lot we can do about several of them, but the fun-free schools, you've done a great job of everything, trying to background.
Yeah.
And reading the kids. Maybe this is First President's next step.
Yeah.
To help support Overton and Rowan County schools. And I'm dreaming a little bit here, but I think our school system is perceived as not being as good as some other counties around us. If we did this, it would become a good recruiting tool for teachers.
Yeah.
For folks who don't live in Rowan County, because they want their kids to go to school in a different county. I think we can have some influence on our school board to try to get something like this done.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Back in the late 90s, I served for the school board, and I tried to get through that there would be no cell phones in the high schools. The parents rose up against it because they said, "No, we want instant communication with our children."
Yeah.
Well, quick.
And
they'll say, what if anything happens with Susie? When I went to school, and call the principal.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's because you tell the teacher tells the principal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. And you did.
Yeah. And the other thing is that's good for religious communities is there's also data. I didn't provide you this data because it's just coming out, but there is data that shows that the kids who grow up within thick religious communities, which means actively involved in church, have other adults that know their name, right? That come to their things, that go to their graduations, that are confirmation mentors. Those kids who use phones for the exact same amount of time, their mental health is better. So if a kid doesn't want to go to church, you can just be like, hey, it's better for your mental health. But that won't work. But it statistically is. So we now have a case for it. What we're doing here is hugely important, right? It's hugely important. Yes, Steve.
Talk about safety. When you think about underage drinking rates going down, pregnancies going down, issues from the male side, there's a level of distraction, not safety. It's also a component of that. When you think about the Gen X experience,
those things were higher during Gen X because we didn't have anything else to do. Those are the things that we did.
Yeah.
In today's world, video games are an incredible distraction. to
Yeah.
males. And one of the reasons the underage drinking's gone down, they're in the basement with Code Red playing video.
Yeah.
When we were out trying to buy beer underage. My point in all of this, though, I see it. I was at a 1-year-old's birthday party about 2 weeks ago, and these are young men in their 30s. And in the middle of the party, 5 of them disappeared into a back room to play video games. And these are fathers. And so this distraction level is really concerning because it's just as addictive as the phone. And with, at least with our males who are way underperforming today.
Yes, they are in every category.
It's unbelievable how the young males are underperforming.
Yeah. In education, in religion, and in vocation, men's gains in the last 10 years have been, have been terrible. And women have done a lot better in all those categories, which is huge and wonderful. But there's another piece of the puzzle. That's another presentation about what's happening in what I would call failure to launch situations. And there's becoming a new term for this in Japan called the hikakori men, and it's men who are in their 30s and they lock themselves in their bedrooms and their parents leave them food and they game and are on social media all night every single day, and they don't live in the real world, and they've become a movement, and we've started to see that happen in the United States. So, all right, I hope you can take this with you, pray about it, and have compassion upon our young people, and let's see what we can do together. All right.